Is handcuffed just as her son and husband were, but she isn't shackled at the ankles. And you may notice something interesting here when you see Elizabeth Siders. You'll notice she's carrying some papers, but Elizabeth Siders isn't handcuffed. But Elizabeth's body language appears to be much different. She's practically cowering. She looks scared. The corrections officer asks Christina a number of questions, which she appears to answer. Elizabeth simply stands by and watches as this entire process unfolds. Then it's Elizabeth's turn to be searched. After answering a few questions, she's patted down, the whole 9 yards.
16 children lived in that house. Not one of them showed you their face. Not one of them told a teacher, a doctor, a neighbor. But some of them did tell someone. They told the entire internet, in captions, on a public app, where millions of people could scroll past. And millions of people did. I'm really starting to hate this house and this family. A child wrote that out loud. In a place anyone could see it, and nobody, not one of the followers, not one of the strangers who liked the video it was attached to, nobody picked up a phone. This week, that same house gave up more of its secrets. The jail released the tape of the 4 adults being booked, and the first one out of the van couldn't stand on his own. The mother of all 16 children walked in behind him, unhandcuffed, cowering, with a bruise on her arm that nobody has explained. And a doctor reviewing this case said something that should stop you cold. Some of these children's bodies may have physically stopped growing. Not from illness, from the house itself. Before we go further, this one is hard. It deals with the abuse of children. And I'm not going to soften it, but I'm also not going to show you the kids or exploit them for a thumbnail. If that matters to you, you're in the right place. If this subject is too heavy today, take care of yourself first. You're inside Quiet Record. Verified reporting, named experts, nothing invented. New here? Subscribe. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. And to everyone who's followed this case with us for 4 episodes now, you're the reason it's still being asked about. Thank you. Because for 3 episodes we asked how a system loses 16 children. Tonight we stop asking the system anything. Tonight we listen to the children, who were speaking the entire time. But first, the tape. Because the 4 adults at the center of this case were booked into a jail this week, on camera, and the video shows you almost everything about the household they came from, without a single word of testimony. They are charged, not convicted. Every one of them is presumed innocent. And still, the footage is hard to look away from. The video comes from the Sally Port of the Southeastern Ohio Regional Jail, the secure bay where a van pulls in and defendants are removed, searched, and processed before they go deeper into the facility. Every jail has a version of this room. What makes this footage extraordinary is not the room. It's the 4 people moving through it, and how completely differently each of them carries the same moment. Gary Siders Sr. came out first, and the officers had trouble getting him out at all. When the wheelchair finally arrived, they moved him into the hallway, removed his ankle shackles, he'd been cuffed at the front, attached to a belly chain, and began the intake. This is the same man whose attorney would later file a motion arguing he cannot understand who his own lawyer is. The same man a judge would release from custody because his medical care threatened to bankrupt the county. The same man a niece has described as someone she remembers as clean, respectful, and lovable. A man whose house, she says, once smelled like lavender, but who she believes has since been hollowed out by cancer, strokes, and dementia. An uncle has said he had a stroke that damaged both his movement and his mind, and that he isn't sure the man even understands what's happening to him. And yet the video doesn't show total confusion. It shows a man who needed help out of a van, who put his head in his hands once, and who then leaned back and crossed his legs like he was waiting for a doctor's appointment. Whether that's confusion, resignation, or something else, is precisely the question a court has now ordered 2 forensic evaluations to answer. One for competency to stand trial, one for sanity at the time of the alleged crimes. The Forensic Diagnostic Center of District 9 has roughly 30 days to begin. The speedy trial clock has been paused while they work. We'll come back to that clock, because it matters more than it sounds. Gary Siders Jr. came out next, handcuffed, belly-chained, shackled at the ankles, and kept that way longer than his father. And the thing that stops you about his footage isn't restraint. It's condition. In a case where 2 children had to be airlifted to trauma centers, where one was intubated in critical condition, where a forensic psychiatrist has since raised the possibility that some of these children's bodies physically stopped growing, the father did not appear to have missed many meals. During intake, an officer checked inside his mouth for contraband. His form noted possible substance use at booking. Staff documented his tattoos. Names, hearts, crosses, a cross with a sword, an outlaw design with a peace sign. He showed the officers his arms, then his legs. And at one point he looked back over his shoulder and waved at someone off camera. It was casual. It was familiar. In the middle of being booked into a jail over the condition of 16 children, it was the body language of a man who did not appear especially troubled to be there. A former FBI agent who reviewed the case for a national outlet flagged something about the son that investigators are almost certainly weighing. Gary Jr. faces 4 separate public indecency charges from late May, 4 incidents at the house. Her point was sharp. Those charges mean neighbors were apparently close enough to witness and report that conduct, and yet not one of them ever reported seeing 16 children. The same house was visible enough for one kind of complaint, and invisible enough to hide 16 kids. Both things were true at the same address. And notice the choreography of restraint in that hallway, because it is not random. Gary Jr. stayed shackled at the ankles the longest. His father's ankle irons came off early. A frail 73-year-old in a wheelchair is not a flight risk. Christina was belly-chained but not ankle-shackled. And Elizabeth was not cuffed at all. A jail makes those decisions in real time, based on who they think might run and who they think might fight. Read the hierarchy backward, and it tells you how the professionals in that room instinctively sorted these 4 people the moment they arrived, from the one treated as most dangerous to the one treated as barely a threat at all. That instinct is not evidence, but it is the first outside assessment anyone made of this family, and it happened before a single lawyer said a word. Then the officers went back for the women. Christina came in first, handcuffed, belly-chained, but not ankle-shackled, and moved through it composed. Not defiant, not distressed, steady. And then Elizabeth, and this is where the footage gets hard to watch. She was not handcuffed at all. She carried papers in both hands. Her body language was nothing like the other 3. Hunched, watchful, the posture of someone afraid of everyone in the room. She stood and watched silently while Christina was processed, then went through her own search. Later she appears again, with wet hair, having been given a shower, looking around the room, taking in the officers and the process, because she has never been here before. She has no criminal record. She has never been arrested in her life. And there is the bruise, on her left arm, visible in this video, and visible again in footage from her arraignment. Nobody has explained what caused it. Nobody has publicly asked. But for a woman whose own attorney has said he is genuinely unsure whether she is a defendant or a victim, and whose brother has claimed publicly that she was indoctrinated into this family, an unexplained bruise that shows up in 2 separate recordings is not a small thing. A forensic nurse who reviewed the public details of this case offered the framework that fits this moment better than anything else anyone has said. She called it the victim-offender overlap. It is entirely possible for a person to be responsible for harm to children while also having their own history of being controlled, isolated, or coerced inside the same family system. Both can be true. Holding both at once is something forensic professionals are trained to do, and something comment sections are not. Elizabeth's attorney says she told him she and Gary Jr. always wanted a big family, that all 16 children were born in hospitals, that she has been distraught at every meeting since her arrest, and that he has seen no evidence supporting the claim the children were confined to a single 12 by 12 room. But the tape tells its own story, and in that story, Elizabeth Siders is the only one of the 4 who was not restrained, the only one who looked afraid, and the only one whose body language suggested she was experiencing the booking not as an injustice being done to her, but as a continuation of something she was already living inside. Hold on to that split, the well-fed son, the frail grandfather, the steady grandmother, the cowering mother, because the children are about to complicate every assumption you might make from it. While the 4 adults sit in jail, or in Gary Sr.'s case, a hospital bed, the 16 children are in therapeutic foster care, scattered across the region, placed with different families in different counties. They're being treated for physical injury and for trauma. 6 of them are very young, 3 sets of twins, the oldest of them around 4. But the investigation's focus is sharpening on the older children, because they are the ones who might be able to say what has been happening inside that house for the last decade. And some of them, it turns out, already did. Just not to anyone who was listening, the older children had phones. They had social media, TikTok mostly. A podcast host covering the case traced the accounts by following who the children followed and interacted with, and identified profiles that appear to belong to at least some of them. What she found is quietly devastating. And I want to be careful here, because these are abused kids, and their words are not entertainment. So I'm not going to attach any caption to any specific child, or name, or age. I'm going to tell you what was there in aggregate, the way it was reported, and let it land on its own. There were no photos of the children. None. No faces, no selfies. The accounts were almost entirely reposted anime and other people's TikToks. Borrowed content, standing in for kids who apparently couldn't or wouldn't show themselves. But some of the captions were original, and some of those captions read like distress signals dropped into a void. One was about how it felt to be uncomfortable hugging a parent. One was about being yelled at while trying. One was a child watching another kid have fun with her dad and remembering being a daughter like that once. One was about a father who, the child wrote, stopped loving the little girl she used to be once she became a teenager. And one, plainly, I'm really starting to hate this house and this family. There is a single video that appears to have been filmed by the children themselves rather than reposted. Cats, shot along the walkway between the front door and the driveway of the Omer Road house. It's small evidence that at least some of the older kids occasionally reach the few feet of world just outside that door, even if everything past it was closed to them. Now, could some of that be ordinary teenage frustration? On any other account, maybe. Teenagers post that they hate their family all the time. But set those captions against what investigators describe. No school, no medical care, no visitors. A room in deplorable condition. And they stop reading like angst, and start reading like the only outbound message a trapped person could send. A forensic psychiatrist reviewing the case called it genuinely unusual that the caregivers allowed social media access at all, because cases like this normally survive inside a completely closed system. No outside contact, no reference point. The Turpin children in California were so isolated that some of them didn't know what a police officer was. But these children had phones, which means they had a window. They could see other kids going to school, other kids being loved in ordinary ways. They could see, in other words, that what was happening to them was not normal, and at least some of them said so, out loud, on a public platform where millions of people could scroll past, and nobody stopped. The bitter irony the psychiatrist pointed to is that the phones were almost certainly given to these kids as a tool of neglect, a screen to keep them quiet in a room the adults didn't want to be in, and those same phones became the one channel through which the children told the truth. Disembodied voices, speaking through borrowed anime, into a feed where everyone was looking and no one was seeing. Which brings us to the hardest medical fact in this entire case, and one you have probably never heard named. A forensic psychiatrist, reviewing the public reports, not the children themselves, raised a rare condition called psychosocial dwarfism. Deprivation dwarfism. It happens when a child lives under extreme emotional trauma and chronic neglect for a long enough time that the body enters a sustained state of fight or flight. That chronic stress suppresses growth hormone in the pituitary gland and forces the child into a kind of biological survival mode. The result is stunted growth and development, not from genetics, not from disease, but because the environment itself is so hostile that the child's body shuts down its own capacity to grow. He said that is what he sees reflected in the reports coming out of this case. And here is the part that divides these 16 children into 2 futures. For the youngest, the 3 sets of twins, the 4-year-olds, the condition is often reversible. Their brains still have what he called neuroplasticity, the flexibility to rewire around the damage. Placed in stable, nurturing homes with real food and consistent care, many young children with this condition experience a growth spurt within months and begin trending back toward normal. The body recognizes the threat is over, the stress response eases, and growth hormone starts flowing again. In a case with almost no hopeful details, that is a genuinely hopeful one. For the older children, the prognosis is far darker. Language acquisition has a critical window that largely closes around puberty. For an 18-year-old who cannot write her own name, for children who are nonverbal at ages where speech should have been established years ago, that window may already be shut. There can be therapy, there can be rehabilitation, but whether these older children will ever live independently as adults is a question no one can answer with confidence right now. The psychiatrist's best case estimate was not months, it was years, possibly decades. And even then, he said, full recovery may not be possible. That split, the youngest still able to heal, the oldest possibly past the point where the most basic human capacities are built, is the defining medical reality of this case. And it reframes the word rescue. 16 children were pulled out of that house alive. For some of them, rescue came in time. For others, it may have come years too late. And no verdict, no sentence, no amount of money changes that arithmetic. Think about what that actually means inside one family. Somewhere in the foster system right now, there may be a 4-year-old whose body, within a year of regular meals and a warm bed, will start catching up so fast the doctors will be able to measure it month to month. A child who gets to have a childhood after all. And in a different foster home, in a different county, there may be that 4-year-old's own older sibling, 17, 18, for whom the same warmth and the same meals arrive years after the window that would have let her learn to read, or speak in full sentences, or live on her own someday, has already quietly closed. Same house, same parents, same rescue, on the same morning, 2 completely different endings, decided entirely by how old each child happened to be when the door finally opened. Speaking of money, therapeutic foster care runs roughly $150 to $250 per day per child. Multiply that by 16. Multiply that by the years these children will need it. The state's $1 million emergency allocation covers the immediate crisis. What comes after it isn't a line item. It's a generational commitment, and the state has only just begun to reckon with the size of it. Now, the interviews. Because the most important evidence in this case may not be a document or a device. It may be the children's own words, and getting them is one of the hardest tasks in forensic work. A forensic psychiatrist explained why the first interview is the one that matters most. The more times a child is interviewed, the greater the risk of actually altering their memory. Each retelling can overwrite the original, introduce details that weren't there, reshuffle the sequence. So investigators have to get as much as they can in that first conversation, while avoiding anything that could be called leading or suggestive, because a compromised interview hands the defense a reason to throw the testimony out. For children who can speak, that means open-ended, narrative questions. Let the child talk at their own pace, guided toward nothing. For children who can't speak, and the sheriff has confirmed some of these children's ability to communicate is extremely limited, with some unable to communicate at all, the process shifts entirely. Speech-language pathologists brought in first to assess each child's baseline, pictures representing actions, play therapy where a child acts out what they can't say. And before any of it counts in court, investigators have to establish something most people never think about, whether each child understands the difference between a truth and a lie. That's a foundational legal requirement for testimony. For children who've never been to school, never been socialized, some of them nonverbal, even that baseline cannot be assumed. A forensic interviewer who worked the Turpin case put it simply, these interviews are long, and the pace is set entirely by the child's ability to stay in the room, not by the prosecution's timeline. The children are at once the key witnesses and the most vulnerable people in the case. Getting the truth without harming the person telling it is the single hardest thing anyone in this investigation has to do. And the defense is already watching. A bill of particulars has been filed, a demand that the prosecution spell out the specifics of what it's alleging. That filing usually comes after indictment. Filing it now signals the defense is pressing hard, early, looking for exactly the kind of procedural opening a rushed or sloppy interview would give them. While the children are being interviewed, a parallel investigation is running through a crime lab. The Attorney General has confirmed that electronic devices seized from the home are being analyzed by the Bureau of Criminal Investigation's Cybercrimes Unit. We don't know how many devices. We do know the older children had phones, and we know those phones were on social media. And a former prosecutor from neighboring Pike County, a man who used digital evidence to prosecute the Roden family murders, one of the worst mass killings in Ohio history, said the device analysis could be extraordinarily telling. Think about what a phone actually stores. Location data, where the device was, and when. If these phones sat inside that house for months or years, the location record is a timeline of confinement written in metadata. App histories, what the children were accessing and when. Communication logs, whether any child ever tried to reach anyone outside that household, and whether anyone ever answered. Timestamps and geolocation on the videos and photos, corroborating or contradicting the story the adults tell. If the phones were handed to these kids to keep them quiet, then those same phones may hold a digital record of the confinement itself. The Pike County prosecutor gave one warning. This takes time. BCI's cyber unit is buried under evidence from cases across the state. Downloading and analyzing each device is slow, manpower-intensive work that stretches into weeks or months, and it can't be rushed without compromising the very evidence you're trying to preserve. The Attorney General is almost certainly prioritizing this case. Even prioritized, the technical reality doesn't bend. And the stakes of that evidence are the whole ballgame. Right now, the charges are 16 counts of child endangering, each. What the phones show, what the children say, and what the medical exams document will determine whether the charges stay there or escalate into something far heavier. The prosecutor has said more charges are possible, including from the original sealed investigation that brought deputies to the house in the first place, which the public still cannot see. And this is the quiet turning point of the whole case. Child endangering is a second-degree felony. Serious, but it is a charge about conditions, about neglect, about an environment. If the phones, the medical exams, or the children's own words establish something the state has so far only hinted at, that any of these children were touched, trafficked, or harmed in ways beyond the deprivation itself, the charges do not just increase in number, they change in kind. They move from felonies about a house into felonies about specific acts, with sentences measured in decades. The prosecutor knows this. The defense knows this. It is the reason a bill of particulars was filed early, the reason the phones matter more than any witness, and the reason nobody close to this case is treating the current 16 counts as the finish line. They are the floor, not the ceiling. Which brings us back to the clock, and to why this case will move slower than the outrage around it wants. Under Ohio law, defendants held in jail get triple credit on the speedy trial clock, so the state effectively has about 90 days from arrest to trial. But the Pike County prosecutor expects the defense to file time waivers, exactly as the defendants in the Roden case did, essentially telling the court, take the time you need. Complex cases with mountains of digital evidence almost always work this way. He estimated this case is several months from even being ready for a grand jury, not weeks. And Vinton County doesn't convene a grand jury often, roughly once every month and a half, in a county with an $8 million operating budget. For a case this size, they may have to summon a special one. Meanwhile, the flow of information is narrowing. The gag order in Gary Jr.'s case bars the officials who know the most from speaking, and it's being challenged at the Supreme Court of Ohio, and the family record keeps darkening. The Columbus Dispatch has now reported that at least 2 other Siders family members, one of them a cousin of Gary Sr., also married 15-year-old girls. That's at least 3 teen marriages in this family. At least 3 girls married off before they were old enough to drive. The Pike County prosecutor, asked how common that is in southeast Ohio, was blunt. Not in his experience. Not anymore. In generations past, more common. In his career, if he'd gotten wind of an adult trying to marry a 15-year-old, his first call would have been to Children's Services, his second to the sheriff, because under Ohio law, an adult having sexual contact with a child under 16 is a felony. So here, as of this recording, is the honest ledger. What is true? The jail released booking video of all 4 defendants. Gary Sr. required a wheelchair and is awaiting court-ordered competency and sanity evaluations. with the speedy trial clock paused. Elizabeth Siders was booked unhandcuffed, with a bruise on her left arm visible in 2 separate recordings. Cause unexplained. The 16 children are in therapeutic foster care across multiple counties. Some can communicate only in a limited way, and some cannot communicate at all. Older children's social media accounts, containing no photos of themselves, have been identified and contain captions consistent with distress. A forensic psychiatrist has publicly raised psychosocial dwarfism as a possibility, reversible for the youngest, likely not for the oldest. Devices are being analyzed by BCI's Cybercrimes Unit. A bill of particulars has been filed. The dispatch reports at least 3 teen marriages in the family. All 4 defendants are presumed innocent and have pleaded not guilty. What is theory? What the phones will ultimately show. Whether Elizabeth is defendant, victim, or both, the question her own attorney says he cannot yet answer. What caused the bruise? Whether the charges escalate. And every psychological read of these 4 adults currently circulating, including the ones offered by well-credentialed experts who have not examined anyone in this family and say so plainly. What is invention? Any specific caption matched to a specific child. I won't do it, and you should distrust anyone who does. Any claim to know these children's names, faces, or exact conditions. And the interior photos of the house still circulating, which the prosecutor has warned may be evidence that someone committed a crime to obtain. If you suspect a child in your community is being neglected or abused, Ohio's hotline is 1-855-OH-CHILD, 1-855-642-4453. You don't need proof, you don't need certainty. Reasonable suspicion is the whole threshold. Somewhere, for years, 16 children posted into a void that everyone could see and no one read. You are allowed to be the person who reads it and picks up the phone next time. One last thing before you go. The children told us. That's the part I can't get past. And I don't think you will either. Not in a police report. Not in a courtroom. In captions, on a public app, in the only language a trapped kid had left. I'm really starting to hate this house and this family. It sat there where anyone could find it, and the world scrolled by. We can't go back and read it in time for them. What we can do is decide it wasn't for nothing. This channel is going to follow these 16 children through the interviews, through the phone analysis, through the grand jury, through the recovery that will outlast every camera on this case. The youngest ones who still get to heal, and the older ones who may not. Subscribing is how you stay in that audience. Not for the outrage, for the follow-through. Because the loudest thing in this entire case was a caption nobody answered, and the least we can do now is refuse to stop paying attention. The children were speaking the whole time. This week, we finally started to listen. The only question left is whether we keep listening after it stops trending. I'll see you on the next one.